about climate change, more precisely about one solution in particular for climate change. The climate crisis is something that has been on everyone's mind lately, as it has been increasingly affecting many of our communities. And many of us are anxious and worried about the future. So today I want to explore the immense potential that regenerative agriculture has to shift this current crisis. Not to simply reduce the damage, but to actively improve and heal the earth as a whole, and to vastly improve the nutritional quality of our food as well. And we'll also explore what each of us can do in our own small way to contribute to this powerful movement. My name is Orna Villazan. I'm a naturopathic doctor and educator with Megafood Canada. And here with me today for this very important conversation is Megafood's Director of Social Impact and Advocacy, Bethany Davis. Thank you so much for being here, Bethany.
Hi, Orna. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is a very hot topic for sure, close to all of our hearts.
It really is. I'm a mom, and when I think about the future and I think about my kids, it really hits home, and it motivates me. It motivates me quite a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see what we can do. Let's get right to the first question. What exactly is regenerative agriculture?
Super great question. It's really been emerging as under this title recently, but it's actually a very old practice. It's regenerative agriculture is how it's defined today. In its simplest form, it's a system of agriculture that's really focused on the health of the soil. So that's like the primary endpoint. So not like being able to grow a lot of things in a small space that all look the same, or, growing stuff that's really sturdy that can get transported. It's really focused on the soil and the health of the soil as the top priority. And there's a lot of wonderful things that happen in a system where the health of the soil is the top priority. Folks that listen to this podcast might have an understanding around why we use probiotics. Why we take them, because we understand that our gut and our body has a microbiome that needs to be well supported and healthy with like healthy bacteria. And soil is no different. Soil has a microbiome and it needs to be healthy too. And the things that grow in that soil are going to be healthier and more nutrient dense, we believe as well, the healthier that soil is. So it's an entire system of agriculture that focuses on soil health, which includes healthy microbial and fungal activity within the soil. And there's a lot of modern agricultural practices that harm soil health. So we're asking for and inviting people into a shift out of that.
That's a really good way to look at it.
Yes. Yeah, Megafood is a multivitamin supplement company, and it seemed to be an easy way to draw a parallel to help people understand what we're pointing to with regenerative practices, because people understand, hey, if you take, antibiotics, it's going to wipe out the healthy flora in your gut, and you need to rebuild it, and you want to eat foods that have healthy probiotics so that you can have a healthy gut balance. And we understand how many aspects of our health that affects. It's exactly the same with soil. And unfortunately, industrial agriculture that relies really heavily on herbicides and pesticides really are detrimental to soil health. And there's a lot of downstream impacts around that we're also kind of standing for stopping and reversing with our focus on regenerative agriculture.
Okay. So I know you've made a kind of parallel with the probiotics for human health in kind of continuing with what we're a little more familiar with. We hear a lot about organic farming. At this point, we have a good concept of what that means. How would regenerative agriculture compare to that?
So organic and regenerative can work really well together. Personally, I'm allergic to a lot of herbicides and pesticides. So I have a deep appreciation for the organic seal and the organic standard. The way that the two are different, because both are sort of standing for healthier farming systems, but organic is more of an absence standard. So it's promising no synthetic fertilizers, no toxic chemicals being used as herbicides and pesticides, no antibiotics in the animals in the system. It's saying, here's all the things that aren't here. which a lot of those line up really nicely with regenerative practices. But regenerative agriculture, it's pointing to something a little larger and more holistic, which is the ultimate goal is healthy soil where we can regenerate soil health. And it's less focused on practices and more focused on outcomes. So if are the practices that you are doing resulting in your soil being healthier year over year over year, if the answer is yes, you're regenerating your soil. And there's all kinds of ways that we measure the health of the soil, and it has to do with carbon content and microbial content and fungal content and things like that. So that's the difference. One is sort of like, don't do these practices, and if you're going to have a cleaner product that's safer for a lot of people, and there's really beautiful high side to that. Whereas with regenerative agriculture, we're really focused on where are we going with all this? What's the end result that we're aiming for, and what do we need to do to get there? It's less prescriptive. It's a little more open so that people can tune into their own systems, their own crops, their own region of the country or the world, and exactly what they need to do for their soil and their farm in order to get it healthier and healthier over time.
It's kind of like, it makes me think of the difference between avoiding, say, junk food or really problematic things that you know are going to set you off versus actively seeking out nourishing foods that are going to provide you energy and like give you that extra sustenance. That's the difference, right?
Yes, that's a great analogy. Yes, I'm going to steal that and use it in the future.
Feel free. So, I mean, you've mentioned the certifications we see, those organic seals that we see on our products when we're buying it, kind of helps us know if something has been grown organic. Is there an equivalent for regenerative agriculture?
Well, even though these practices are ancient, these are practices that indigenous peoples have been using for thousands of years. And it's kind of the way agriculture was always done before it became really modernized. So despite it being an old practice, it is a new framing and a new intentionality around it. And it's kind of a new and sort of young movement. So all of the programs are pretty new. One certification-based program or standard-based program is called the Soil Carbon Initiative, which we are founders of. We were initially funding that with Ben & Jerry's and Annie's and Danone White Wave, and we did it in collaboration with Green America and the Carbon Underground, two nonprofits that focus on this work. And what we did was, there wasn't really a global standard for measuring soil health. So if we're saying, hey, we want healthier soil over time, year over year, how do we measure that? How can we show it? What kind of tests and at what frequency do we need to do in order to be able to prove this out? And so that's really what that standard is. It's a method or a tool or a framework for measuring soil health, and it has recommendations on how to do soil sampling and how frequently and what kind of tests needs to be run and what to look for. So that's one thing that exists, and a lot of folks it's peer reviewed, it's rich, and it's in a pilot phase. So we're asking, MegaFood has lots of folks participating, but we're asking companies at large and even communities to help us pilot the Soil Carbon Initiative. And so we're working with a network of folks and encouraging more people piloting this and basically trying out the standard and using it to measure and getting more data over time. So that's one thing. The Rodale Institute, where if you're not familiar with them, they're sort of like the godmothers maybe of organic agriculture in a modern way, have partnered to create something called the Regenerative Organic Certification, ROC. And this is a cool program. It is not designed maybe for everyone to use. It assumes that organic is already achieved and that regenerative is above and beyond organic. And to me, what it really represents is sort of this like idealized perfect world version of how a farm can function. And so as a manufacturer, a brand, if we had a product that had one or two ingredients, we could probably get that certification. if we had a lot of control over our supply chain, if we owned the farms and could control every aspect of how things are done. And for products as complex as mega foods, it's a little out of reach. And my main concern, I think it's wonderful to have sort of a vision for the future, but what concerns me is that we've been working on the organic standard and forwarding organic agriculture for 30 years, and we're at like less than 1% of cropland certified organic currently. And so to say that regenerative is only something above and beyond that, some fraction of 1%, feels limiting. And so what MegaFood really is standing for, what I stand for, is anyone can do something today that will improve their soil health tomorrow. And making that as open as possible. I want GMO farmers thinking about this. I want conventional farmers thinking about this. I want organic farmers thinking about it, because not every organic farm is having healthier soil year over year. Some of them are having less healthy soil year over year. So we really want and need, because of our timelines, we really need everyone thinking about this on a broad scale. The power of widespread soil regeneration to draw down carbon from the atmosphere and have a positive impact on climate change is really high. And we want as many people as possible to be able to take actions towards that, so that we can reverse the curve. And I could talk a little bit about exactly how regenerative agriculture impacts climate.
Yeah, well, actually, that was my next question. I mean, it was why we brought this up as a topic. And so what is some of the science and the research and saying, like, what are we seeing?
Yeah, great. So if you go back to, 6th or 7th grade biology, maybe, and think about when you first learned about photosynthesis, that is what agriculture is. Agriculture is taking carbon from the air and within healthy soil, building it into a plant. We're actually taking carbon and displacing it into a plant. Like trees are made of carbon, plants are made of carbon largely. And so we are drawing down carbon from the atmosphere and keeping it in the ground and turning it into plants through this like very basic biological process. So encouraging really healthy soil to draw down way more carbon. That's what happens when soil is healthy and functioning the way that it's meant to, and it's optimized. It draws down a ton of carbon, and we can actually draw down carbon and the greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere through agriculture. So it can actually offset it. Now, you can also do agriculture in a way where you're contributing to climate change and releasing a lot of greenhouse gases. Carbon always started out in the soil, and now over time we've been releasing it from the soil, either from drilling or with agriculture, because if you are rough and not careful with soil, if you're weeding or doing things like tilling is a form of weeding where you use a tractor and you kind of dig out all the weeds, you disrupt that microbiome in the soil, you let air and heat from the sun get in there, and it releases carbon. So part of why we have such high emissions has to do with kind of agriculture done in a sort of modern industrial chemical heavy way, whereas regenerative agriculture can bring it all back down. So we've got all this carbon that got released into the atmosphere. Some of it's up in the atmosphere warming us up. Some of it's fallen down into the oceans, causing ocean acidification. And what we need is all that carbon that's either in the atmosphere or in the oceans to get back into the soil and into the earth where it belongs, so that we can reverse the curve of this increasing climate temperature and have less extreme weather events. And that's only like part of the win for all here, because we also have healthier soil, which is more nutrient dense food, and a system of agriculture that's more balanced ecologically. So we don't need to use as many herbicides and pesticides. So we don't have all of these toxic residues on our food. So it's a win for all. And it's just the cycle of life where we've been doing a style of agriculture that disrupts the normal cycle. And really what we need to do is be willing to get out of the way a little bit and let nature do its thing. And that's what's gonna really make a big impact. And there's the science is also emergent, even how we think about and measure these things. But Rodale Institute did put out a white paper a couple of years ago that shows that even if we just focused on North America grasslands, we could draw down enough carbon to reverse the curve as far as climate change. So
Wow.
the capacity is really, it's really, really high. And all we need is more buy-in and more people participating and more people thinking about their food and how they grow it or where they get their food from or what kind of materials they're collecting to put into products like for brands like Megafood. If we have more and more people focused on soil health, we can get out of this bind that we're in, and we can kind of like let the earth do the healing that it wants to do, get it back into more of a homeostasis.
That's so inspiring, and it doesn't sound that hard to do, really. I mean, it is, because we're trying to change entire systems of, they've run for so long. But like, what are some examples that farmers are doing? Like, what are some of these practices that they're doing?
Yeah. So a key practice is just not leaving the ground bare. So now we'll grow stuff and then we harvest it all and then we just kind of lay it, have it be kind of soil that's just not covered by anything. And that's just really common. Like we plant, we grow it, we harvest it, we leave it alone until the next year when we go and plant again. And having soil be bare like that is really detrimental to soil health. Soil is not bare normally out in a grassland or in a forest. There's stuff growing all the time and it's protective to the soil. So when there's potential for wind damage, water damage, heat damage, that's not protective. So there's a practice called cover cropping, which means putting other crops that maybe you're not going to harvest in the same way, but you can grow and let them kind of go through their grow process and just stay there to protect the soil. There's single species, which would be like, one type of seed that you plant, or there's multi-species is even better because you've got all different types of plants. So not only is it protecting the soil from being bare, it's actually drawing down additional carbon because you're growing an additional plant rather than not taking that opportunity. So you're pulling more carbon down through photosynthesis. So that's one. And also letting areas of your farm rest. So rotating crops, crop rotation. So you might grow on it for 2 or 3 years in a row, and then you give it a year off where you're not growing a crop and you just let it rest. That's another really important practice. And it's challenging because a lot of people want to grow on every single acre that they have so they can maximize money that they might make in a given year, but it's kind of a short-term move because they're going to have healthier soil year over year and have a healthier farm year over year if their soil is healthier and they're able to let their land rest a little bit. Another thing is herbicides and pesticides are really toxic to soil health. A lot of the way that they work, Roundup, everyone's heard of Roundup, and the active ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate. It's patented as a broad spectrum antibiotic. So if we're trying to encourage microbial and fungal activity in the soil, but we're spraying really heavily with antibiotic herbicides on a really regular basis, it's really challenging to keep that soil healthy. It becomes more like dry, cracked dirt than like a rich, moist soil. And it has less ability to draw down carbon when it's dry like that and struggling. And it also has less ability to absorb water when there's a lot of rain. So it can turn into more of a flood rather than soaking in water. And also if it can soak in all that rich water, it's more resilient during times of drought. So it's really, really supportive for us to be honoring the microbiome of the soil and encouraging it with things like composting and even animals working in a farm system. So cows peeing and pooping all over North America and stomping on it and doing migrations, basically peeing, pooping, and stepping in it, and then leaving it alone while they did migrations. Like that's why we have the fertile soil that we have here. That's why we have this amazing topsoil that we can grow so much of our food in. So that can be a really important aspect as well. And it's part of that circle of life and like a healthy ecology. Those are some of the core practices, and a practice that you would avoid, which is very common, is what I mentioned. It's called tilling, which is basically, cutting up the top part of the soil to get weeds out. So you might rake an area of your garden to kind of pull up any little weeds that might be growing and then plant. And that's sort of what we're pointing to. So different types of practices that are considered low till or no till. So basically disrupting the soil as little as possible are all really, really helpful. So combinations of these practices are what folks can do to have much healthier soil. Yeah, and even just like letting some random seeds grow on a plot of land that you're not using in the off season, and then just letting it kind of fall over and stay there, even something like that can be so helpful. So those are some of the practices.
It's so amazing to start thinking of the soil itself as a precious commodity and something that we need to treasure and take care of rather than abuse and expect it to keep providing for us. So it's very much about thinking of it as a living organism and how do we care for it, and what can we do so that we can live symbiotically together with our soil and be healthier all around.
That's right.
For everyone.
Yeah, the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Division, said that we have, this is going back like 6 years now, said that we have 60 years left, 60 harvests left of doing agriculture the way we've been doing it before we've totally destroyed the healthy topsoil that we grow our food in. So that's on average based on different areas in the world. But the way we're treating our soil, it's out of balance. It's too extractive, and it's too narrow and too short term, the way we think about it. And if I want my kids to have access to food and a food supply and a food web that can like take care of the people on this planet and have a reciprocal relationship, we have to change how we think about soil and not just say, what can we get from this? But say, how can we support this? And that's kind of what this movement's all about.
And that brings me to like things that we can do. So like, how does this, I mean, Mega Food, obviously we're speaking on behalf of Mega Food here today. Like, how does choosing your supplements have an impact on contributing to this movement?
So consumer concerns and support are a really important way. Like brands are really open and listening to their consumers. So buying from brands who support regenerative agriculture is obviously huge. And if you really love a brand that you don't know how they're growing and what kind of supply web they have or what kind of relationship they have with their farmers or where they get their ingredients from, you can ask those questions. And that actually is really helpful. That's all information that companies are paying a lot of attention to. So that's one way. Definitely support brands that are supporting this. Vote with your dollar, as they say. But there's a lot of other stuff that you can do just on your own. And that's one of the things that we also want to invite people into. You don't just have to be some big farmer in the Midwest in order to think about soil health. I live pretty much in the city. There's not a lot of green area on my property. It's kind of a driveway in the house, and that's almost it. But there is this one strip between the driveway and the house where I just threw a bunch of different pollinator seeds. Like I just threw them all over the side yard, and it looks like a jungle. I mean, it looks crazy. We've just let it totally grow and do whatever it wants to do. But that's protective too. It's inviting for pollinators, like monarchs and bees, who are a part of a healthy ecosystem and really important in our food system. So it's supportive for them. And it's covering that ground and allowing, and the fact that it's so overgrown points to how much carbon's being drawn down through photosynthesis. So we're doing it right here. And even if you're in like an apartment building in Manhattan, you can get a container and you can grow in your windowsill or on your balcony. You can take a little bit of soil and treat it really well and nurture it, and compost and things like that in even small ways. There's also ways to think about this in your communities. We're doing a lot of spraying for bugs and ticks and mosquitoes and things like that on like playgrounds and sports fields where kids play, and even just in sort of if there's like beautiful woodland walks or bike trails, we're doing a lot of spraying in those areas, trying to control for pests. And that can be really detrimental to soil health too. So you can do things in your own house, you can do things in your community, you can ask like wherever you get your food or whatever farmer you get food from or whatever stores you get your food from, like how is this grown and is it regenerative? And you can demand that and vote with your dollar. So there's really a lot of influence that every individual has.
And every little bit counts too. It's like, it's just knowing that that little small plot of land is drawing carbon down, and it's an amazingly powerful feeling to know that you're contributing. I mean, I've thought about this in the past, and it's that when we talk about climate change, it often is about sacrifice. Like, what do we have to deprive ourselves of that we've grown comfortable using? And this message is different. It's not so much about sacrifice. It's like, what can we do? Like, what can I actively do that is actually really not very hard? I mean, if you do have a yard, you can have a section of it, just let it grow wild and throw those wildflowers. I can imagine how colorful it must be.
Yeah.
You know, and know it. And yes, as you said, contributing to the bee population and to, you know, to everything.
Yeah.
So it's inspiring in a pretty big way that way.
I don't want to understate, these are traditional methods. It is easy to do stuff in your own yard. And if you're a farmer who's been doing really conventional, more industrial, chemical heavy growing, it's a big shift and it requires some education and some testing. And yeah, it's smart farming. It's smart farming, and it does require planning and attention and problem solving. Luckily, farmers are fantastic at that. But it is a shift away from kind of doing automatic, well, I buy these seeds, I plant them all, I spray every 4 weeks or every 2.5 weeks, and then I water every 9 days. Like, there is a way where we're being a little more intuitive with the soil, and it's not an easy shift for everybody if you're on a mass agricultural scale. And it is still really accessible. Mm-hmm. And so it's smart, and it requires more planning, and it's one of those like simple but not easy type things. Mm-hmm. So I want to honor that, and I do want to absolutely affirm that, yeah, you can do stuff in your yard that actually matters. And Green America has a Climate Victory Garden webpage where they're monitoring what everyone's doing here, and everyone gets to say what they're doing in their yards, and it's adding up. So that's really exciting. Oh,
that's wonderful. But I mean, I know yes, you're absolutely right to kind of say, okay, it still does take some effort, but my understanding is with time, if there's enough work and education that goes into and enough change that happens with their processes, that they actually end up more robust, and there's less danger of losing their crops to, you know, a bad season, because the soil itself can handle extremes a little bit more easily. And
absolutely, yes. And you get to save money. You don't have to water as much. You don't have to pay for all the chemicals you're putting in. You don't need to supplement with fertilizers as much, because the soil has everything that it needs, because it's got its kind of normal cycle going on. So there are immediate cost savings to farmers, which is really supportive. And yes, you're going to have a more vitality in your farm system and in your soil. So you'll be a lot less susceptible to some of the dangers we see these days.
How does MegaFood decide which farms to work with? Do you have a process for that?
Yeah, we do. We have something, it's called the Healthy Farm Standard. So we kind of built our own standard in the vacuum of not having a lot of well-established long-term standards out there. It's a survey, it's a scored survey. It focuses on soil health, conserving resources, and thriving livelihoods, or sort of the people part of agriculture. And all of our key partners participate in this, and it basically scores them on a regenerative, like how regenerative is this farm, and we're moving them over time to be more and more regenerative. And we actually support them financially to do that. So if they want to try out multi-species cover cropping on a few acres of their land, we'll financially support them trying that out and taking some soil samples and getting them measured at a lab to kind of see, hey, what happened when we did this? We really want to incentivize what we're asking for and not just be like a typical partner and just like buy what we need, but we actually want to partner with them to move this ahead. And it's our goal that year over year, all of our supply web is scoring higher and higher on this standard and being more and more regenerative. So we wanted a way to qualify and quantify this, not just say we stand for it, but actually show what we mean by that, and put our money where our mouth is.
That's a beautiful mission for a company. Like you're going above and beyond, helping the planet be in a better place than you found it.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty proud of it. And
yeah, it's beautiful.
Also, like I do have a little bit of a selfish motivation, because I have a real preference that humanity survives and that my kids have food to eat 30 and 40 years from now. And so I will say, yeah, it feels good to do good, but and to do the right thing. And also I've got pretty strong preferences about how I'd like to see things go. And so yeah, that's a big part of my motivation too.
You know, learning more and more about this over the last while, I've, you know, more and more inspired. I'm going to be moving soon, and I'm going to have my little yard, and I want to plant a vegetable garden. So if someone wants to learn a little bit more about regenerative practices, where would you guide them to?
I would guide them to two organizations. Green America has their Climate Victory Garden. They tell you everything you need to set up a climate-friendly regenerative garden at home. And also an organization called Kiss the Ground. There's even a film that's on Netflix available called Kiss the Ground, a documentary about this. Those are two amazing organizations. If you're wanting to support soil research and regenerative agriculture research at large, then get connected with the Carbon Underground. They're raising money and putting money together into really smart projects. That's another organization that if you've got some dollars that you'd like to donate, that's a great place to go.
Okay, keep those in mind. So that brings us to the end. You've shared a tremendous amount of information here in a very short period of time. Thank you, Bethany.
Yeah, thanks for
I think it's safe to say we all feel a fair bit more empowered and inspired about what we can do.
Good. That's my hope, because this is really scary stuff. And I recognize that there's a lot of just fear and heartbreak and maybe overwhelm related to what are we going to do about climate change. And my practice is to sort of say, well, there's a lot of stuff I can't do, but what can I do? And let's focus there. And so, yeah, that's what my deal is. And that's what I hope.
You're definitely up at the top of people who are doing, definitely having an impact.
I hope so.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Bethany.
Thank you so much for having me.
I just wanted to close off and just mention that MegaFood Canada has developed a wonderful tool actually to help each of us support not only our health, but also the health of the planet, because choosing which company that you want to pair up with in order to, you know, reach some of your own personal health goals. It's not only about which brand and which supplements. Obviously, you spoke a lot today about how that is an important factor, but also individually, which supplements are best for us and where we are in that moment. And that can feel a little overwhelming to figure out at times. So I invite you to check out the megafoodcanada.com website and give a try to our personalized supplement quiz. It's some very simple questions and takes you through and gives you some ideas of where to start for yourself. So thank you so much, Bethany, and hoping everyone takes at least one little step towards this powerful movement. Thank you.
I hope so too. Thank you, Orna.